Okay, good afternoon everyone. Welcome along to our Audit Committee meeting. I don't think everyone knows each other, so we'll just do some quick introductions, I think. I'm Gordon Johnston. I'm one of the Health Board reps on the IJB and I chair the Audit Committee. I'll go around people just as they appear on my screen because that's easiest for me. So Fiona.
I'm Fiona Colley, the councillor rep on the IJB. I'm vice chair.
And Robert.
Hi, I'm Robert Clark from NHS Forth Valley Staffside.
Roger.
Hi, I'm Roger Ridley from Unison. I'm the union rep for the Falkirk Council side of the Health and Social Care Partnership.
Stephen.
Good afternoon, Stephen Kirkwood, Chief Finance Officer and member by virtue of office. Thanks.
And Dave.
Hi, I'm Dave Keenan. I'm the Governance Support Officer to the IJB and its committees.
Gail.
Hi, I'm Gail Woodcock, Head of Integration, and I'm covering for Chief Officer today.
Sarah.
I'm Sarah Lacey. I'm Chief Social Work Officer for Falkirk.
My apologies for getting your name wrong. Tony.
Tony Gaskin, Chief Internal Auditor for the IJB and the Health Board and various other health boards and IJBs.
And Gillian.
Hi, I'm Gillian McCready. I'm a Senior Audit Manager with Audit Scotland and part of the new external audit team.
Okay, welcome everyone. Hopefully everyone has the papers and we can get on with things. I think we have a full house in terms of members, so there shouldn't be any apologies. Is that correct?
Yeah, just Patricia's not with us today, Chair.
Okay, are there any declarations of interest in relation to any items on today's agenda? No. Can we move then to the minute of the last meeting, which was back on the 2nd of December? Go through first for accuracy. So what in the papers is page 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Can we take that as an accurate record then? Thank you. Are there any matters arising that won't come up elsewhere on today's agenda? I didn't have anything. Does anyone else? No. Okay. Item 4 then is the external audit plan. Gillian, you're going to give us a verbal update.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'm the Senior Audit Manager in the new external audit team. And just to mention the other members of the team while I'm with the introductions, Pauline Gillen is the Audit Director and Engagement Lead for the audit, and Pauline unfortunately couldn't be with us this afternoon. She's got a diary clash and hopefully she'll get along to one of the next meetings to introduce herself properly. The other names that you might see in the next year or so in relation to the audit is Sarah Lawton. She's a senior auditor with us, and Jennifer Dillon, who's an audit officer, and they are both kind of responsible for the day-to-day running of the audit and completing most of the audit work. So you might see their names across the year as well. It is obviously a verbal update, and we would normally have an annual audit plan at this committee at this time of year. And if I could just quickly give you a wee bit of the context and background as to why we don't quite have that today. Some of our 21-22 audits were still late in getting signed off last year as we try and kind of recover to our pre-pandemic timescales. And that coupled with the new appointment round, so this is year 1 of the 5-year appointment, and that involves, once we iron out what audits are going to the firms and what ones are staying in-house with Audit Scotland, there's a kind of internal reorganisation where we all go into new teams working on the new audits, and just the process of that, introductory meetings and handover meetings with the firms, we just get started that bit later this year. But just to say where we are, so we actually do have a plan finalised now this week. It just wasn't in time for the papers. Our planning work and our risk assessment work is complete, and Stephen has seen our draft plan, which we were able to then quickly turn around to a final version. So in terms of what we do going forward, there was a bit of discussion yesterday, but after this verbal update today, I'm happy to share the final version of the plan with members and take any questions or comments via email or even a call or a meeting. But then it was agreed that we would bring the plan back to the next audit committee for full discussion if it's needed at that time, so that it gets the full kind of process that's needed. And just to give you a flavour while we're talking about it of what's in the plan, in terms of the risks that we've identified through our planning process, we always have a risk in about management override of controls. We're unable to rebut that for any of our audits, so it's in all our plans. Just due to the nature of management's role, they're able to override controls and it can impact the financial statement. So we design audit procedures around that. That was the only significant risk and material misstatement that we've identified. There is another area of audit focus included in the plan, which is where we don't assess it to be a significant risk, but something that we'll certainly design procedures around as well. And that's in relation to the Scottish Government's clawback of COVID funding from reserves. And for us, really, that's about looking at how it's disclosed in the accounts. Whether further guidance comes out around that, we'll review it against the guidance. We also have our wider dimension responsibilities, and that's set out in the plan around, financial sustainability, financial management, vision, leadership, and governance and the use of resources. So for the IJB specifically, we'll be looking at the achievement of savings in year, the development of a medium to long term financial plan, and then our planning guidance this year specifically asks us to look at the arrangements for cyber security and climate change, so there'll be a wee bit of work done around that. Also, best value, so we'll be looking there specifically again at kind of follow-up recommendations from the previous auditors around the IJB's completion of self-assessments. And then the last couple of things just to highlight while we're on it, the timetable that's included in the annual audit plan. It's kind of a proposed timetable working towards the September audit committee date for sign off, and we are aiming for that, but we are kind of flexible a bit, or we're trying to be a bit more kind of pragmatic about what we can get done, considering we've started later and we're still trying to get back to these timetables from before. And then the last thing before I'll stop is just around the audit fee. So the audit fee will be included. It's been set at £31,470. I have to be honest, the audit committee, the audit fee is set by a separate business group within Audit Scotland, and I can take any questions on it if you have any, but I'll answer what I can, and if I have to, I can come back with you when I get further information from them if that's needed. So I'm happy to take any questions on what I've said or comments.
Thanks, Gillian. That's very helpful. I mean, I know from other organisations that handover of auditors is running a bit late this year for a whole variety of reasons. So it's not unexpected that we don't have the plan. We will need to formally agree at our next meeting, but I did suggest that we circulate it to members in the meantime so that members see it sooner rather than later and have an idea of what's in it. Anyone have any questions or comments for Gillian? Tony.
Just in terms of obviously the reliance on internal audit, because the external audit plan is quite late. If there are any areas where you are going to place reliance, can you let us know as soon as possible, just so we can share? And on that subject, there's probably something called the ICE, which is an overarching holistic governance assessment, which you might not have come across elsewhere. And even I know Sarah came from Lanarkshire, but we didn't do it in Lanarkshire because it was a different arrangement. So I think that might be something that we'll make sure we copy you into the contents of that, because it may cut across them, and there's no point in us both doing it. And Stephen's going to be we've got that as a separate audit this year, and that's going to be quite onerous for Stephen. So if we can coordinate on that front, suppose Stephen and indeed Patricia aren't being doubly bothered. So the only other observation is just struck me that with both climate change and cyber security, I'm not I mean, it's always it's a more complex area than one might assume, but I'm not sure the IJB has any cyber to be secure. It's owned by the partner bodies, and again, to a certain extent, with the net zero, although it can commission net zero, the operations are managed, and the responsibility for net zero largely lies with the partner bodies who actually own the property, employ the staff, pay the expenses, etc. So I just wonder the extent to which an IJB has control over those, apart maybe from this strategic plan specifically commissioning net zero and asking the clients to ensure that they operate secure systems. I'm not sure how much there is in it, because we've wrestled with that in the past, and the idea of who the data owner is becomes far more complex than one might reasonably. It certainly wasn't one of the things they thought about when they established IJBs. So there just might be a little bit there that you might want to think about in terms of what the proper role of the IJB as opposed to the HSCP is, because a lot of that is owned by the partners, and it gets quite messy quite quick in my experience.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, Tony. Gillian, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I was just in terms of the cyber security and the climate change. Yeah, it's in our audit plan and guidance to do it for all bodies, but I think we are also the team that's doing the council audit, so I think there'll be a bit of crossover in terms of what we do there. So we'll very much maybe start with the councils and then see use that to kind of fill in the gaps. So at least we've got that crossover between the two. In terms of the internal audit reliance, we met with your colleague Tony already, and we had a good chat just to get a bit of background and chat about what they're doing. And we agreed that there'd be no specific reliance, and we would just take assurance from the kind of our wider dimension responsibilities on your work.
Thanks. So sorry, I apologise. I should have known that, but I am, as you will have noticed, getting on a bit, and I just don't remember stuff anymore. Luckily, I'm going soon, so I don't have to worry about it too much before I start forgetting my own name or where I am. So apologies for that, Gillian. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Then Stephen.
Thank you. It was just to give some assurance that, as Gillian has said, I've had a look over the draft audit plan. The dates were entirely consistent with our committee dates and with statutory deadlines. So assuming we can stick to them, then all is good. In terms of the audit fee, Gillian also alluded to an increase in the audit fee. This was something that the IJB Chief Finance Officer Network challenged with Audit Scotland, because there's quite it's not a big amount of money in the overall scheme of things, but it's a relatively large percentage increase. And we did receive a response which alluded to the fact that some of the audits are done internally, but most of them are commissioned through other bodies, likes of EY, as we had previously. And in terms of the latest tendering round and the latest market uptake, the rates reflect the rates being received through tender. So that is why there's an increase in the audit fee. Just for the board's information. Thank you.
Okay, useful to know. Thank you, Stephen. Any other questions or comments then? Okay, thanks, Gillian. We'll move on then to item 5, which is the Strategic Risk Register. Stephen.
Thank you. So the IJB Strategic Risk Register is a standing item at the Audit Committee, and this particular report follows the usual format. There has been one new risk added to the register since our last meeting, and essentially that was splitting the primary care risk into 2. This means that we now have 10 live risks, 9 are rated high risk and 1 is medium. Now, normally I wouldn't highlight the background section of the report, but as our new external auditors are here for the first time, I think it's an opportune moment to remind us all that effective risk management is a fundamental aspect of good corporate governance, and it plays a key role in supporting the delivery of both the IJB's strategic plan and our other priorities. I also highlight that the Strategic Risk Register is regularly reviewed at the senior leadership team meetings, every audit committee meeting, and twice a year at the IJB board. So as I say, I wouldn't normally touch on the background, but given that Gillian's here, I thought that was worth highlighting today. So table 1 is the main table, and it summarises the 10 strategic risks with full detail contained within Appendix 1 for each of those 10 risks. Appendix 2 includes the scoring matrix that we use. All 10 risks are regularly reviewed with a particular focus on the further control actions. As these are completed, they become current controls where appropriate. The bottom section on each of the detailed risks provides a short summary from the latest review date. In terms of Table 1, some of the key considerations in determining current risk ratings are listed in the bullet points that we find in section 4.3 of the report. The 9 current high risks are very much a reflection of the current operating environment. Even with the best controls in the world, we would still be challenged with the impact of the cost of living, the challenging recruitment conditions, and for all these reasons, risks remain generally high. It's worth noting that in terms of the primary care risks, Gail and I have just recently been looking at providing a primary care update to the IJB board meeting in June. This won't be risk specific, but it will provide an update on current primary care developments and issues. Finally, section 4.4 notes the intention to undertake further assurance reviews of strategic risks, and I'll be working on that with colleagues from both the Council and the NHS risk management sections. Audit Committee is asked to consider and comment on both the high-level risk summary in section 4.1 and the detailed strategic risk register in Appendix 1. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. So the split of the primary care risk follows the health board doing exactly the same things. So it kind of makes sense to have that consistency there. The number of high risks is, I guess, a bit worrying, but yes, it is kind of where we are right now. And if anything, when we look at the funding position, then it's no doubt that we are in a tricky situation. There are risks that need to be managed, so it may be alarming, but it is an accurate reflection of where we are. Roger, you want to come in?
Thanks. Apologies. I'm still fairly new to the audit committee, as people know, so I'm still trying to get my head around some of these risks, and I think that's really important for me in my role here. And looking at Appendix 1, a couple of things occurred to me, and I suppose I feel they're just a bit. Are they clear enough for me? There's a lot of things there which are saying they're ongoing, which I always see when ongoing is put in a form like this. How is it measured? How do you measure something which is ongoing? And that I just worry a bit about that. The other thing that occurs to me is the way that the risk is measured, and we have the likelihood, 5 levels of likelihood, and I suppose from a statistician point of view, I'm thinking what exactly is likely, and likely over what sort of time scale, because likely over 5 years is different from likely over 3 months, and what does likely mean? Is it 50% chance of happening, or maybe I'm asking too much of people? But and finally, the results of what would happen, there's 9 different categories of them in the thing, and I'm just wondering whether it would be helpful to have it clear which category of outcome would happen if the risk were to come about, rather than just say a risk is going to come about. For me, I'd appreciate if I knew what was posed with the highest risk, because it could be a number of those different categories at different levels of risk. So which is the highest of those categories that's most likely to come around? I don't know if that's fair or not. So somebody could answer that.
Tony, were you coming in response to Roger's point?
I was coming in about something else, but I can certainly answer that one. And it comes back to, you might have heard me talk about this before, but governance with purpose. The point of these things isn't to come up with a definitive categorical answer. It's to come up with something that's useful. So there are, if you go back to the about the quiz, but the definitions that those probabilities come from. There's one that's going to happen every 3 months, one that's going to happen every year, one that's going to happen every 3 years, 5 years, and beyond that. So there are technical definitions. And if I understand you correctly, you're also asking, well, there's different levels of materiality. So give an example. Once I spoke to someone who ran a canteen and they had a high likelihood that they would kill someone, which was slightly worrying because I'd eaten in the canteen. But if you think about a canteen, just as a stupid example, you're probably not going to kill that many people over a period because you're not going to last very long. But there is a remote possibility to kill someone. There's a possibility you could give them food poisoning, and there's less of a possibility, there's a less material but more likely possibility that you're going to give them some food that's really quite awful and no one's going to enjoy it very much. And you have to actually look. So the possibility of killing someone, it's unlikely but very material. And at the other end, there's something that's going to happen a lot, but doesn't really make much difference. And the point of all this is not to come up with a technically perfect answer or add them all up and divide them up in some probabilistic way. It's to come up with the one that you think is the biggest issue and use those scores. And there are people that can, and actuaries and financial firms, although that doesn't always work very well. But it's not about having some perfect answer. It's about what you can use. It's about what allows you to take the correct decisions to mitigate the risks as far as you can. So it's important to perhaps have these discussions, but realise that they're for a purpose, which is about managing the risk. So the focus always has to be, are we agreed on what that means? And then the most important discussion is what we're going to do about it. So there's a variety of ways you could cut it. It doesn't really matter as long as we're all agreed which one we're using. Which probably takes me to the point that I was intending to make, which is about the target scores. And one of the key roles for the audit committee of deciding whether those target scores are realistic. And that is something we've got work in the plan that you'll see later to look at the risk register. But I think every time, and I think I've shared the assurance principles with this committee. If not, I'm sure I have. I'm sure that's my memory again. But in those principles, one of the key questions is, are the actions, which are here described as further controls, likely to bring the score down? And there's two ways you can look at that. You can look at them individually, but you can also look at the fact that all of those risks are quite static at the moment. And yet our target scores are all quite some way below the current ones. So you would, if those are going to be achievable, expect some kind of movement. So I think overall for the committee, there is a bit about understanding the risk and making sure the score's reasonable. But there are also other questions you might want to ask about, and the primary care one just struck me because I've done audits elsewhere on that. Are those 4 actions, if you were to complete them successfully, going to get the score down from, I've moved to the other thing. Yeah, so if we look at the primary care, the target risk for primary, oh no, that's out of hours. But if we look at the primary care sustainability, the target score is 6, which is really quite low. And there's a set of actions identified. And if we do all those things, will that get us down? So there's three things. Are those going to get us down to a 6? And if so, by when? It looks like by the 3 actions are due to finish. 2 of them should be done already. And the third one is to be done in a year's time. So are those 3 things going to get us down to a very low risk for primary care, given what we know about the shortage of GPs, etc.? Now, that's not to comment on that risk individually, but it's a sort of thing as an audit committee you might want to think about. And again, I'm sure I've said it before, but the idea of having target dates for those target scores, I think, is quite important. So to answer the technical question, you can cut that risk 100 ways. The important thing is you understand it and does it feel right? And then does the target score feel right in comparison to the actions? And also, does the current score feel right in the sense of you have a lot of other data as members of the IJB? So let's say the primary scare risk was 6 at the moment, and you see a plethora of data saying we haven't got enough GPs, people can't get appointments, etc., you would note that discrepancy. So again, in terms of the risk score, it's not just about having those numbers and multiplying them out. It's does the overall context make sense in line with all the other information you have about service delivery and everything else. So yeah, I mean, you can get quite sophisticated and mathematically with that if you want, but it kind of misses the point of, is it conveying the right message, and are we confident that the things we're doing about it are going to get it to where we want to be?
Thanks, Tony. Roger, does that answer your question, at least to some extent?
Yeah, no, I think it does answer the question to some extent. I guess the first point about having ongoing in a lot of those categories, it still seems a bit vague and unmeasurable, and that worries me. But thank you, Tony, I appreciate that.
Okay, thanks. Fiona, thanks for waiting.
No worries. It's actually on page 17, the capacity and infrastructure in the appendix, and there's a particular reference to splitting the risk into 2 separate risks, one for workforce and one for infrastructure. And there was discussion about progress in a deep dive review work and a working group, and I just wondered about where sort of progress on that, on whether that working group has come to any conclusion yet about whether that risk should be split. I mean, I think it's sense for some of the stuff around the huge challenges in relation to workforce and recruitment and retention sitting separately, because it's so integral to every part of everything we do, more or less, including some of the other risks in here. But I just wondered maybe whether Stephen has any update on that and any further information he could provide.
Stephen, is that something you can advise us on?
Yeah, I'll try and cover a few points from all 3 contributions, if that's okay. So in terms of the ongoing, Roger, I think that is relatively unsatisfactory. It's much better if we can have defined actions with definitive end dates, and where possible we've got that, but where we're looking at transformation projects and the strategic plan, then there will be ongoing actions within the actual individual projects. I would anticipate that there are defined aims and objectives, but in terms of what we've got in this risk register, where we've just covered it with that general caption, then for each of those projects, they may well have defined objectives, measurable objectives, but what we're putting in on the strategic risk register is just that there is a transformation programme that we're doing redesign. So that's why it says ongoing here, but I would like to think that out with that, if I was to speak to Suzanne and have a look at the transformation programme board and the different initiatives that we're taking forward, same with the partnership funds, there are individual key areas and they're all specified. So although it's ongoing here, there will be more detailed backup elsewhere to support them. Some of the other actions, though, as you say, are specific items that it's easier to put an end date on. And for some of them, actually, if you were to look at this plan 3 months ago or 6 months ago, you will see some of the items that had a target date are no longer in the future actions part. They're now further up in the current controls part. So we can actually track that there has been progress and movement through it with actual dates. The point, I think, Roger, about what are these scores telling us, on the detail, and apology, these sheets, because there's so much information on them, they're quite small and I'm struggling to read the hard copy myself, but what we should find is that there is more than one score on each of these individual risks. There is a current score which looks at the current likelihood and the current impact based on where we are just now. There is an uncontrolled score, which would be, what if you had no measures in place? How bad would it have been at the start of each of these sheets? And then there is a target score. Arguably, the challenge with a target score is when do we expect to achieve that, and that's Tony's point about having dates. But within the main body of the report, we've also referred to the fact that we are looking at all these different parts, but there is also a need to do that deep dive. And I don't like the word deep dive because it means different things to different people, but that wider assurance for each of the individual items. There are a couple, and I didn't mention it when I was covering the main report, but there's a couple of these that have a fairly low future risk score that in the current context probably don't seem right. But to fix them, I think I would certainly like to see a deep dive focused on that specific area. Most of the time we're looking at this, we are currently looking at, well, what are the future controls? Have we delivered them? Are they still relevant? Do we need to add other controls in? But actually, we also need to take that wider step back that doesn't just look at our own risk register and our own activity and plans, but also what are they doing in the NHS? What are Falkirk Council doing? And try joining it all up. And that sets that wider context. But that really requires a sort of more intense look yet again, and that's why some people call that the deep dive. Other people might refer to it as a sort of assurance review. So hopefully that helps explain things a bit better. Fiona, you put that. Oh, actually, before that, the primary care one. I think there is also an issue there that, as it stands just now in the risk register, primary care has up until recently been managed through NHS Forth Valley. And so what's on the risk register is a reflection of the NHS Forth Valley strategic risk register. We now, since the end of January, have a responsibility for primary care within the IJB, and so we need to go through that transition period where we need to start taking full ownership of it. We need to have the right governance structures in place, and that will take a bit of time to transition through that. So Gail was working this week on a job description for a new head of primary care post to help us build that capacity so that we've got the correct infrastructure in place. I think I did mention that we are looking to take an update on primary care to the June board. It won't be a warts and all covering all areas, but it's just to give a sense of some of the things that are currently developing and what's happening with primary care, and all of that is part of us building up the picture of primary care so we can better inform the risk register. Fiona, I'm not even going to try reading the particular risk on capacity and infrastructure because it's too small for my eyes just now. But what I can tell you is we have had discussions on that one, and the feeling is that the workforce challenges in themselves merit a separate risk on the strategic risk register. As it stands just now, they're both that and the IT challenges and the property challenges are all put together as one. We wondered at one point whether our workforce, the strategic risk, are the other risks lesser, but actually the discussion that we've had so far would indicate actually those other risks are also meriting being on the strategic risk register. So that's where we would like to split it down into two at some point in time, but we haven't got to the stage of actually doing that yet. We do have a working group that has recently met. I wasn't part of it, so I can't say too much about it, where we were looking at the workforce plan and the actions that were at the back of the workforce plans so that we can take them forward. So yes, I do think this needs to get split into two at some point in time. Potentially, partly it's capacity. They are both captured just now, and it's right that they're both captured, but it would be good to split it at some point. What I would like to do as part of our deeper assurance is actually look at the rest we've got. We've got 10 just now. If we split that one, it would become 11, and I actually think it gets to the point where there's too many strategic risks and then we lose our focus. So we probably at that point also need to look at what are our top 10 and make sure that they are the ones that we're focused on. So there's a bit of work required before I can get to that stage, I'm afraid.
That's very helpful, Stephen. Thank you. I think whatever way we cut it, workforce is going to be up there as one of the key risks for all the reasons we all know about right now. I mean, it is such a risk, both in terms of statutory and voluntary sector and the providers as well. So, you know, we know that's something that we do need to take action on. And back to Tony's point earlier, the key point is the actions we are taking to mitigate the risk, rather than exactly how we describe it. Okay, are there any other questions or points then on risk, or can we move on? Okay, thanks everyone. Next item then is internal audit progress report. Tony, please.
Thank you, Joe. There's a lot of this meeting, so I'll try and be brief, especially as we're coming on to the exciting topic of the audit charter later. So we're cracking on with the audit plan, as you can see. Both ourselves and our local authority colleagues. So for next year, that'll be the local authority colleagues. This year we're doing the lot, although the local authority colleagues are providing us with information. The big piece of work is the one I mentioned earlier, which is the ICE, which you'll see that the NHS version thereof in the summary of reports from other bodies. But that is a holistic overview of governance across the piece, which is an important piece of work. And we normally do that at year end, but because it's the first year and we had experience elsewhere where it got quite messy at year end, so we're doing that slightly early. And that will give an overview across strategy, risk, all of these sorts of areas. And that's the big piece of work. And then we have the assignment plan for the strategic plan. That's with management for review. We'll provide comment on the HSCP commissioning plan, which is obviously an important piece of work and fundamental. And that's a piece of work, as you're probably aware, that we've done elsewhere. It's been quite interesting in terms of the range of issues. And I would probably relate that in a sense to the Audit Scotland report we've got later, and indeed our ICE report. And I won't bang on about it too much now because you'll have the report next time, but we absolutely view strategic choice as being fundamental to the sustainability of the IJB. And I'm sure, Gordon, you've heard me talk about this before, so I won't labour the point, but we are in an extreme risk situation in terms of workforce, as we mentioned, and finance. The IJB, maybe Stephen would appreciate it, possibly the IJB is less this year and next year in a financial pressure as there's perhaps the Health Board and Council, but that's coming. And we will need to make choices, and they need to be made strategically in a very controlled way, taking account. So that's a fundamental piece of work, and it ties in with the ICE and with our other work. Workforce, so there we are, we're hitting all the spots. The workforce audit is going to be September, just because we've got to do, and we want to do it in order, strategy, then workforce. It kind of makes sense. Albeit, as you may find out in a future report on other bodies, it's not always the case that workforce plans start with strategy, decide how many staff you need, and then work out how we're going to get there. Perhaps in an ideal world that would be the case, but that isn't the case in all clients. But that's the way we want to do our work. And we will be looking both at the workforce plan itself, and because we always link to the risk register, this issue, which perhaps goes back to some of the early conversations, how are you going to get assurance on that? Because a lot of the work is going to be done by your partners. Yeah, there is certainly a health board workforce plan, but the recruitment is done by the partner bodies. You don't recruit or employ yourself. You rely on their mechanisms for a lot of things. So it's really important that we understand how those things fit together and how you're going to get assurances that the things that you've decided need to be done are being done. And as ever, whether they're being effective. And that really ties back to this idea of you've got a target score. So we technically we look at both adequacy, which is if you do those things, should they be good enough to get you down to target? And then B, are you doing them, and are you doing them effectively or not? So that and not all of that will be done in that workforce audit. It'll be more focused on the adequacy because it's early days, but we will be looking at how you're going to get assurance on adequacy as the plan starts to roll through. So that'll be that piece of work. And as I say, the strategic plan will be coming in June, and that's where we are in terms of our specific work for the IJB. Nothing through yet, it's backloaded. June's going to be busy, but certainly have more than enough for me to sign off as Chief Internal Auditor at year end because of the ICE, the holistic nature of that, and the strategy work, and will be sufficiently advanced with the workforce to be able to work out if there's anything that will scare the horses. So we'll certainly be able to sign off in June. That's not a problem. In terms of the other things, there was nothing from the council, unfortunately, of any great relevance. There's an awful lot of stuff in terms of the ICE for the health board. And as ever, both the council and the health board have their own audit committees. And some of you will have had the joy or have the joy of sitting on those. But when these reports come here, they're not really for you to kind of comment on the detail of the report. It's for you to have an understanding of how those issues impact on you. And I suppose going back to Stephen's point about this meshing of the risks of the partner bodies with your own, if we were to say, here's a hideous mess in the health board, or our local authority partners were to say, here's a major problem and a massive risk in the council, you would need to reflect on that in terms of your own control environment and indeed your own risk environment. So that's why they're there. It does, the ICE one does give you a flavour of how many areas we've covered, and also you can probably read between the lines of that and understand that there is, it's not a particularly positive report, not in the sense of the health board not doing things well, although things could always be better, but of the environment that's out there and the general risk environment facing the health board and therefore yourselves. Just so you understand, it's not that the local authority is necessarily better or worse in that regard, but they don't report in that way. So you're not going to see a similar report from the local authority body. We just report things in a different way. But that gives you an overview of what we're, if you like, worried about in terms of the health board. And also, as you're probably aware, and again, it's relevant because you know, under large hospital set aside, you're responsible for emergency. There was the ED review, and that is therefore relevant to yourselves as commissioning those services, albeit they're run by the health board. So I'm quite happy to take any questions on progress to date, what we're planning to do, or indeed kind of general questions about the partner body audit reports.
Okay, thanks, Tony. There's a lot coming down the line for us then. Any questions or comments, colleagues? No.
Really saving yourselves up for the audit charter. I didn't get many questions on the charter. But,
all right, let's move on to item 7 then, the internal audit annual plan for 23-24.
And indeed the audit charter. So I think I've all covered the charter now. It's not the most exciting document in truth. Even I don't find it exciting, and I'm an auditor. So it's there. It's actually important, and it's important that you approve it because it describes the relationship between ourselves as auditors and the IJB as a whole, the IJB officers, the partner bodies, and you as an audit committee. So it's an important document, albeit not necessarily very exciting. But I'm going to ask you to approve it. So any questions you have, any comments, more than happy to take those on board. Possibly the more interesting aspect is the audit plan, and that's been discussed with officers, but it's here for your approval because it's your plan. And this is the plan for the coming year, and the key issues, as we've discussed, I think one of the key things is bringing our kind of perspective on both assurance and risk management to the risk register process. And actually, it's a it's not that the risk register's wrong. It's a good risk register, in fact, but it's always that thing of what different perspectives can you bring? How can we apply those principles we talked about? And obviously, because we're auditors, how do we get assurance? It's always that thing. I'm sure some of you heard me talk about how do you know? How do you know the scores are right? How do you know the target scores are reasonable? How do you know those actions are going to get you there? How do you know those controls are working? Because if it goes wrong, particularly you as an audit committee, people will be asking you, why did you sign off on that? So it's key. And as an organisation, you need to know those things are right. Because if you don't have a good understanding of your risk, your strategic risks, and as Stephen pointed out, it's kind of about your top 10 biggest things you need to worry about. One of the things I always say to people when I'm talking to officers about the risk register and indeed on XAX, what do you spend your time looking at? What do you spend your time doing? What do you spend your time worrying about this week, last month? And if that's not what's on your risk register, you're either spending your time on the wrong things or your risk register is wrong. So we will be looking at all those aspects, applying the principles, but really, I think helping with the developments that Stephen's already putting in place, and indeed validating those, so that this thing we talked about adequacy. There's a lot of proposals and a lot of ideas of how it can be taken forward. And before you go down that route, we can actually say, yeah, that's something that we as auditors would sign off on. That's in accordance with the principles. That looks like a really good thing to do. That at year end we'll be happy to sign off on and be happy about. The other one is external providers. I think again that was mentioned. This idea of the pressures facing all of us, and perhaps buffeting our external providers more than most. Because if you're a health board and you're a council, I'm not saying it's easy because it's not, but you're big, you've got critical mass, councils have reserves, you've got some kind of scale and ability to deal with these pressures. We're commissioning from people who perhaps don't have those economies of scale and who are facing the very extreme pressures. And it's how we understand that, how we have resilience plans in place, how we identify problem areas and have solutions to hand to make sure that we don't get exposed. And some of that will be about helping our people. Some of them will be about identifying problem areas and having plans in place. And it's not just about existence, it's about quality. It's about how we make sure that these people are still able to deliver a quality service. And we're not just relying on the care quality commission turning up and tell us something's gone wrong, that we have advance notice of quality issues, finance issues, and we can get in there early and make sure that we the service we're commissioning, the service we want, is going to be provided and be sustainable. So that's the idea of that audit. It's one we've run elsewhere with a deal of success, and we've got a questionnaire we use. So it's something that I think we can apply and learn lessons from the good and bad we've seen elsewhere. But that's our view of what we think might be important. You're the audit committee, so if you have other thoughts or indeed comments on what you would like to see out of those audits, this would be the time to voice those, and we can make any adjustments, but then ask you to approve the plan subject to any changes you might wish.
Okay, thanks, Tony. I mean, I can see the sense in looking at external providers, given the amount of the services the IGB commissions from external providers. It is a major risk, as you say, given some of the pressures and factors that we know affect smaller organisations more than bigger ones. Does anyone else have questions or comments on the plan or the charter? Stephen?
Just some comments, if that's okay. I agree with you, Gordon. The external provider one was a reflection of the fact we spent a lot of money there. It's also a reflection that we've changed some of our internal processes recently, or during and since COVID. So it's one about just trying to seek some assurance that what we've got in place is good and effective. And if it isn't, to make sure that we get something that is as effective as possible. So that's why that one was there. The risk management one, we were also keen to see that there because we have previously had audits on risk management, and we feel that we've made good progress in some aspects, other aspects perhaps not so much, but we've got a new risk management policy. We've got an annual, or we will have. Last year it was 18 months, I think, or 15 months, but next year in June we should have a new annual assurance statement. So we've made good progress on some of the recommendations from the previous audit, but we thought it was the right time to then take stock of the progress that has been made, look at what's still outstanding from the last audit, draw a line and see, is it still relevant, or should we actually be looking at other stuff instead? One of the things in the previous audit that focused was around risk appetite, and I think that's something that perhaps the health board and the council have also struggled with. So we felt it was an opportune time to look again at risk management from where we now are rather than where we were a couple of years back, and take stock of that and see what the correct direction should be moving forward. So that was just a bit of commentary on the last two included in the audit plan. Thanks.
Sorry, Sarah, I should have said I've worked with a number of IJBs on risk appetite. So that's obviously something that we can build on. I didn't mention it on the grounds it's a topic I tend to get overexcited about, and perhaps more excited than anyone else in the room. But yes, it's certainly something that we can bring out, experience from elsewhere on.
Okay, sounds good. Any other comments then, folks? Nope. So are we happy to approve the plan and the charter? I'm seeing nods, so I'll take that as approved. Thank you. Okay, item 8 then is National Audit Report and Inspection Overview. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I've got to apologise. I've got a dry mouth today. I've no idea why. That's why I switched my camera off and had a wee drink a minute ago. So apologies if it doesn't come across right. But okay, so the agenda item 8, the National Overview Report. As it says in the exec summary, the report's an overview of relevant national audit, scrutiny and inspection reports that have been published since the previous audit committee. We've noted that 10 reports have been published, 6 by Audit Scotland and 4 by the Mental Welfare Commission. I'm going to skip the background on this one, but suffice to say that this is a standing agenda item, and the inspection reports will be considered at the Clinical and Care Governance Committee. So that really leaves the 6 Audit Scotland national reports. Now, at pre-agenda, we only had 5 reports at that time, but you'll see we've also now sneaked in the NHS in Scotland report as a late addition. It was published on the 23rd of March, probably after we'd done the papers first time round. So that's why we now have the 6. Paragraphs 4.2 through to 4.7. Yeah, provide a brief summary for each of the 6 reports. The Audit Committee will already be familiar with our own, the Falkirk IJB Annual Audit Report, so I haven't really provided any commentary on that one. The Falkirk Council Annual Audit Plan for 2021-22 report is again of fairly limited value, as it doesn't include the final audit report recommendations and action plan. Then after that, we've got the audit of Falkirk Council's pension fund, but for that one, there were no recommendations or improvement actions. So again, there's not really any learning for us from the first 3, other than what we've already taken through our own committee process. That takes us on to the Local Government in Scotland Financial Bulletin for 2021-22. This provides an independent analysis of the financial performance of the councils during that year and sets out some of the longer term financial challenges facing councils. The Accounts Commission's wider local government overview report is expected to be published in May of this year, and that will present more detailed review. I've included 6 bullet points extracted from the overall report that are particularly relevant to the IJB, and those include savings performance, the impact of ring-fence funding, the reliance on non-recurring reserves, and the need to make difficult spending choices. Moving on to the fifth report, the audit of NHS Forth Valley. That includes an action plan with 5 recommendations, one of which relates to the presentation of IJB transactions across partner organisations. There is no question about the accuracy of the transactions or the reports. It's just that the presentation is different across the Claxon, Stirling, Falkirk, IJBs and NHS Forth Valley. And there was a recommendation that if we were consistent in our reporting, then it would be more transparent and understandable for the reader of reports. We have actually looked at this, and across Scotland there are the same variations, but we were looking at least for the local areas to come up with a common presentation for this year's annual accounts. Finally, in terms of the NHS in Scotland 2022 overview report, I've noted 4 key messages, 5 recommendations that are for Scottish Government alone, and a further 4 recommendations to be jointly progressed by the NHS and Scottish Government. The key messages include the risk to investment, the difficult measures, the difficulties progressing with the recovery plan, I beg your pardon, workforce capacity, and a need for a realistic appraisal of what is deliverable. I've also noted the recommendations in the main body of the report, but I won't repeat them just now. I think, as I said earlier, I won't cover the inspection reports. They're going to the Clinical and Care Governance Committee. So I think all that remains is just to go back to the recommendations and ask the Audit Committee to consider and comment on the content of this report, and hopefully I've teased out some of the main items. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. And as expected, some of the same themes we've talked around the financial challenges and the workforce challenges coming out in both local authority and council world. I don't think that's any great shock to anyone around this table. Any questions or comments on these reports? Tony?
Just very briefly, I really commend the Audit Scotland report as a read. How much good it will do is open to debate, but it's an excellent report. Unfortunately, it's been preceded by a series of excellent reports, none of which have made any difference. So if you look at it last year, Lee's team said basically the NHS recovery plan wasn't going to be, it wasn't deliverable. And now they're saying it's not been delivered, but there is a report out there that basically implies it has been, which isn't necessarily as accurate as one might hope. So, there is something really quite fundamental there, which largely talks about the pressures on health boards. Because if health boards are being asked to deliver things that aren't achievable, then obviously that's an issue for them, but it's also an issue for you because you share the same objectives. And bluntly speaking, if the health service fails, you go with it. So there is, I think it's really a good report and well worth a read. Whether it will make any difference to the Scottish Government's priority setting. So in essence, what they're talking about is having realistic objectives and proper ways of measuring whether those realistic objectives are being achieved. And obviously that's a good message for anyone. But if that's not the case, then that does create all the risks we've talked about in terms of workforce, finance and everything else and service pressures will just be exacerbated. So I think it's well worth a read, even if it's not necessarily a particularly cheery document.
It's certainly a very sobering document and does set out very clearly what the challenge is going ahead. Although, of course, in relation to IJBs, then I think it very much strengthens the case for transformative change across health and social care as the only way we're going to get anywhere. If we keep trying to do more of the same with less money and with more pressure, then eventually the system is simply going to break. You know, we need to do something different. Okay, can we note those reports then and move on to item 9, which is the governance statement improvement actions? Stevens, it's you again.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 seconds while we get organised. So the Governance Statement Improvement Action Report provides an update on progress with a range of matters arising from both internal and external audit recommendations. Following a previous format change, these matters are now grouped into 4 broad headings, as we can see in section 4.1, namely Integration Scheme, MSG, SIPFA Financial Management Codes, Audit Committee Self-Assessment, and other reviews. The detail behind all of these is found in Appendix 1. And just before we look at that, section 4.3 of the report notes that there has been good progress with the integration scheme, but delays with the SIPFA FM codes and audit self-assessment due to capacity concerns. The report, as you read it, also notes of delays with the medium-term financial plan, but I'm afraid that's more a reflection of when this report was drafted. In fact, I'm not afraid of it, I'm actually glad, because the medium-term financial plan has now been produced and that will be presented to the IJB board meeting in March. So the report is slightly dated is what I'm trying to alert you to, I'm afraid. Apologies. Work on the SIPFA Financial Management Code will start next week, and with a fair wind, I'm still reasonably confident, or let's say I'm confident, that we will have a working draft available by the 31st of March as we set as a target date, although that won't then come to the committee until June, the June cycle. But I think in terms of deadlines and ambitions, we're still on for having a working draft available by the 31st of March. In terms of the detail appendix, I won't go through it all, but it does note that there's a finance subgroup aiming to have a new risk share agreement ready by the end of April. So we've got meetings arranged for that, and that will be as part of the integration scheme. There's a desire to do a refresh of the MSG self-assessment, although that might not be ready by the end of June. A number of the other reviews you will see are scheduled to take part in the first quarter of 2023-24. And as I've said already, the medium-term financial plan is going to the March IJB board for approval. So all that remains is just to go back to the recommendations and ask the audit committee note the progress report on improvement actions. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. So there's quite a bit of progress there on several of the items and definite timescales for others. So that's good to see. Any questions? No. Not seeing any hands. Are we happy then to note that report? Okay, that brings us to the end of the business then, unless anyone has anything else they need to raise. No. Okay. It's a good meeting, some really detailed discussions there. Thanks everyone for your contributions. I'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.